This week, on Laura the Rhetorical Pug, I would like to talk to you about bodies and objects in rhetoric. To do that, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague, Professor Napoleon Bone-Apart. Hello, Professor Bone-Apart.
Hello, Laura. Thank you for inviting me. It is my pleasure to talk to you today.
Professor Bone-Apart, when most of us think of rhetoric, we think of words, maybe images, advertisements, political speeches, but most of us aren't thinking of bodies and objects. Could you tell us how these function rhetorically and what scholars have to say about them?
That is an excellent question, Laura. Perhaps thinking of bodies rhetorically is easier than thinking of objects this way because we tend to think of our bodies as doing things that could have rhetorical impact. And when we think of speeches and advertisements, we already think of how body gestures and performance affect the messages of those pieces of rhetoric. But what about the everyday interactions we have with our bodies and other bodies? Karma Chavez does an excellent job of tracing rhetoric's evolving relationship to bodies in her article, The Body, an abstract and actual rhetorical concept. Bodies have always mattered to rhetoric, but which bodies have garnered attention? Which bodies have been called on to represent other bodies? Which bodies can be abstracted? These are questions she traces through rhetorical theories. She draws our attention to feminist scholars, and especially Black feminist scholars, who ask rhetoric to contend with actual bodies rather than abstract bodies. Feminist theories helped highlight how actual and abstract bodies are understood and have meaning within systems of power. Chavez connects feminist theory with new-materialism, a particularly ripe connection because it can trace how power works through human and non-human bodies with attention to intersectionality.
Oh, Professor Bone-Apart, you just introduced a lot of terms our audience might not understand. If there is a new materialism, is there an old one? What are these materialisms? And what is intersectionality?
Oh, thank you, Laura. I get carried away sometimes. Let's see if I can explain. Let's start with intersectionality. Black feminist Kimberly Crenshaw coined this sociological term in order to account for the ways in which all of us are located at intersections of systems of power and oppression. So, for instance, a white woman is oppressed under the system of patriarchy, but under the system of white supremacy, she experiences access to power over those who are non-white. We all have complicated intersections of identities that give us varying access to power. Materialism might be a little more difficult to explain. We can begin to grasp the concept of materialism by thinking of the way we use materialistic. If I say to you, Laura, you are too materialistic, focused on all your toys and bones and treats, and never thinking of the greater meaning of life. We understand that to mean that you are too focused on things. We use this in a negative sense, but philosophically, it is a response to Platonic idealism, which posits meaning as somewhere above and beyond the material world. A materialist would counter that meaning is produced in the things of the world, the bodies and objects that you mentioned, Laura. So your bones are important. Materialism is also connected to Marxism. In Marxist thinking, materialism can mean two things, as Dana Cloud has stated. Quote, the first suggesting that social relations and concrete sensuous human activity are the source of human consciousness, and that human beings derive identity and purpose from their social contexts. You can probably hear in this conception the reliance on the definition I just gave. I, of course, find the insistence on focusing on the human quite irritating and limiting. You and I, Laura, certainly also have social relations and sensuous activity that give our lives meaning. Cloud identifies the second definition this way. The idea that the modes of production, or the way in which goods are made and distributed in society, determines the social relations and forms of consciousness of any given epoch. This conception of materialism leads to the critique of the ruling class. As Cloud puts it, a materialist theory of language, an ideology suited to a materialist view of history, suggests that economic forces and relations of power motivate discourses that justify, obscure, or mystify the workings of powerful interests and structures of power. But this is getting a bit removed from your initial question about bodies and objects, which is really about a new materialism. New materialism is not as narrowly Marxist, in part because of critiques brought about by feminists, folks of color, and even animal rights activists. New materialism suggests that matter is agentive, as Richard Marback has highlighted in the article Unclenching the Fist, Embodying Rhetoric and Giving Objects Their Due. I have a piece I've been working on myself called The Fire Hydrant as Object, as Exigency, and as Sensory Experience, in which I ask, where does the meaning of the fire hydrant reside? Is it in the intention of its use to extinguish fires? I am told that for bipeds who are olfactorally challenged, fire hydrants are painted in bright colors so they are easily located by firefighters. But for me, a fire hydrant is a rich olfactory experience as well as a call to add my own scent. If I did not sniff the fire hydrant, would it still mean something? When I mark the fire hydrant, does its meaning change? And Laura, when you come and sniff the fire hydrant I just marked, is the rhetorical impact the same? The meaning of the fire hydrant is... Oh, excuse me, I have something in my eye. As I was saying, the meaning of the fire hydrant is in these interactions. So it has a kind of agency, as do we, as do firefighters. And it's all still about bodies and embodiment. I love this section of Marback's article. I quote, the representational agency of objects and our interpretive agency over objects emerge as they converge in a range of embodied activities. Objects may be ordered through activities of interpretation, but our relationships with objects are extensively and intensively embodied. Objects take up space, and our bodies are space. The space of our bodies moves around, away from, toward, sometimes with, and even through objects in space.
That's a lot to think about, Professor. I'll never sniff a fire hydrant the same way again.
I'm getting sleepy now. Goodbye.